Ta-da!
Yay! Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish.
Woohoo!
I know I say this every time I'm excited about guests, but you're really going to love this one. His name is David Gefen. Not like you haven't liked all the other
One
ones.
second. Let's establish first. David Geffen's the billionaire. I wish I had his bank account. I'm Daniel. It's okay. I get it all the time.
Okay, we'll pretend you're David for a day. Great way to
Yeah.
start the show. So his name is Daniel Gefen, and he is a future billionaire. That's why we're getting this all mixed up.
There we go.
And Daniel teaches people how to sell thousands of books and become a #1 bestseller in their niche by guesting on podcasts, which you guys know I have a podcast. I love books. He is the perfect guest for me. I sought him out on LinkedIn. He's been featured in Forbes, Inc., CIO, Influencive, and was recognized in the top 25 influencers in 2017. He's the CEO of Gefen Media Group. See, he has the potential to be a billionaire. And what we're going to talk about today is speaking to thousands of people in your underwear, which I just have to say before we jump into it, that's kind of a guy thing. I think us women do this in our PJs. But then your underwear for guys probably is your PJs. So I'm really parsing.
Oh God, I don't know how deep we can go here. I sleep in my underwear. I don't know. Can I say that on?
Yeah,
okay.
you can.
I just did. So whatever. I don't do PJs. I don't know. Maybe when I was 10, but I don't do PJs anymore.
Okay.
But you could also be in your PJs. It's totally cool.
Okay, so women can be in your PJs, you can be in your underwear, you could even be in the buff, which I do actually have a pretty funny story about someone who ran a webinar, an auto webinar, and it got jammed up and he was in the hot tub naked. So
that's so funny.
Ended up finishing it with in the naked buff. So you can do it any of those ways. So welcome.
Thank you. I am fully clothed today, just so you know, but I could be in my underwear.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm fully clothed today as well.
Right.
So now we've established that. So we've really blown up the entire show. Thank you for appearing, Daniel. And
absolutely.
Have a great day.
No problem.
So tell us about how you put this all together, like how you got this idea about books, because you do have your own book, The Self-Help Addict. What prompted you to put all this together into one platform?
Here's the backstory. So about 4 years ago, I had an offline business, fairly successful business. Basically, I had no social media presence whatsoever. In fact, I didn't even have a social media account, no Facebook account, no Instagram account, nothing. My wife had a Facebook account and she would post the pictures of the kids and I would go on there and look at the pictures, but I didn't have my own account. And I guess I was kind of an introvert. I'm kind of an extroversial introvert. Okay, for those of you listening, the ones who understand will understand. Okay, but there's such a thing as an extroversial introvert, and so I didn't have a following online or anything. And the only time I ever spoke was on a table in high school, trying to get attention, and instead I got detention. So my first exposure to podcasting, 4 years ago, I get a phone call from someone who said, Daniel, I heard you got a really cool story about how you grew your business. Basically, to cut a very long story short, in my business, my COO was suicidal and basically couldn't come into work, and my whole business went into turmoil. We had hundreds of clients and I didn't know what to do. And so I ended up coming up with this crazy idea to outsource the whole business, and then basically fired everybody, left the office, went to a hotel lobby, and just with my laptop and my phone, built up my business from a hotel lobby. I outsourced everything to one of my competitors. So it's a whole crazy story. And so he called me up, asking me if I could be a guest on his podcast. Now, my response to him was, what's a podcast? I had no idea, right? No clue. And then he explained to me what it was. And I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. And so next thing I know, I'm sitting in my pajamas or my underwear, right? In my house in Israel. Now, by the way, Israel is a tiny, tiny country. just to give you sort of an idea of how small it is, you can drive from one end of the country to the other end in about 4 hours. That's how,
Really?
yeah, it's the size of New Jersey, the whole
Wow.
country. So imagine I'm in this tiny, tiny, tiny country, and I'm in my house, in my underwear, and I've got these headphones on, and I'm just talking to this host like we're doing now, sharing my story, and I absolutely fell in love with it because I was like, wow, I was meant to do this. I really enjoy this. And at the end of the hour, he's like, oh, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Daniel. And I said, so, how many people were listening to that? Because I'm just here sitting, staring at a wall. Like, it's weird. But, who was listening to this? Now, if you would have told me 50 people, I would have been, wow, that's amazing. 50 people, 100 people. Wow. He said, over 1,000 people were listening. And I almost fell off my chair. And I said, what? Where are these people? And he said, all over the world. And he starts listing countries: Japan, China, Sweden, Denmark, South Africa, America, Canada, England, France. I was like, what? That's insane. Guatemala, I didn't even know that was a country. I didn't even know where that was. I was like, what? So that's when the light bulb moment went off for me. And I said, oh my goodness, I need to go all in on this podcast thing because this is huge, right? And so, to cut a very long story short, I ended up starting up my own podcast. And I loved interviewing people. I just loved it. And as I interviewed more people, I got really good at it. And I was meeting some great people. But here's the problem: I wasn't getting a lot of listeners. I didn't know how to get myself out there. I didn't have any social media experience. I didn't know how to promote myself. I wasn't like a marketing guy. I'm a great sales guy. Get me on the phone with anybody and I will close the deal. I will sell. But there's a difference between a salesman and a marketer. And so getting myself out there and attracting a lot of attention, I didn't know how to do that. So then I thought to myself, you know what? What's really interesting is people coming on my show, they're getting automatic access to my audience that I've built up myself. And I've spent a lot of time building up this audience. And they're just coming on, and within an hour, they're just getting access to my audience. And I thought, well, why don't I go on other people's podcasts and get access to their audiences so that I can leverage their audience? And so that's what I started doing. And every single time I went on another podcast, my podcast downloads started to spike. And I saw an increase in the number of listeners. And I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. And I managed, just by getting on other podcasts, I managed to grow my own podcast to over 250,000 downloads. Ended up becoming a top-rated podcast in the business space on iTunes. Interviewed billionaires, New York Times bestselling authors, incredibly huge influencers on my show. And so the way that I started Gefen Media Group, where the booking agency, was I started getting inundated with pitches from people trying to get on my show. And it was awful because everybody's trying to get on the show, and it sucks. Like the pitches are just really boring, lame, me too. Everybody's trying to get in, and they're saying the same things. And that's when the next light bulb moment went off, which was, well, hold on a second. I'm friends with all these top-rated hosts. I'm a top-rated host myself. I've been on over 60 podcasts. I've had over 150 high-profile guests, so I know what a great guest sounds like, and I know how to pitch a guest because I'm being pitched all the time, and I know what doesn't work. Why don't I start a podcast booking agency? And that's how it happened.
That is so amazing. And you're right. I get pitches, probably not as much as you, but I get really lame pitches. And most of the time I reach out on LinkedIn and choose my own potential because
Right.
I see the things, but I get PR people all the time, interview this guy, he has a book. Well, that's not what my podcast is
Yeah.
about.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's really annoying when they don't take the time to actually listen and understand what you're doing. Just here's someone or assistants. We
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of assistants these days. My boss
Yes.
thinks he'd be a really good,
Yeah.
has your boss ever listened? Well,
Yeah.
no. Like
No.
nobody
Right.
thought you'd ask that.
Yeah. It's they don't have any relationship with you, and they haven't done their homework. It's just a very lazy approach to doing things.
It is. It definitely is. So Tell us about how you book. Obviously, you've done a lot of networking to be able to do
Mm.
this and relationship building.
So what I've learned over the years in the podcast industry and in the branding and marketing space is everybody loves a great story. And if you know how to position yourself and tell the right story, that's going to make all the difference. Um, I just watched The Joker last night, and probably a lot of people listening to this have already watched it. And if you haven't, um, I, I highly recommend it. It's very disturbing if that's your kind of thing, but it's incredible acting. But I was literally on the edge of my seat the whole time. I was just like enthralled in this movie. And you know what it is? It's the story. You just become part of the story. You sort of relate to the character in the story, and you really relate to the person. Um, and the second thing that's really interesting about the Joker, I'm just using this because this is the most recent thing I've seen, is what the Joker did without realizing it. That's what's genius about this movie, is that he didn't even realize he was doing it. He was a nobody. He was like a bum clown psycho guy who everyone picked on and bullied and beat up. And he created this huge, massive movement. He created a massive, massive following because they believed in his mission, in his message. And that's what people want. They want to, they want to be, they want to belong. That's really what it is. We all want to belong to something greater, right? Because everybody goes to work and they pay the bills and come home and take care of the kids, and and they eat and they go to the bathroom and then they shower and they go to bed and wake up and do the whole thing again. It's just like, oh God, is that what life's all about? So we all really want something deeper and more meaningful, and we want to be part of something greater, right? We want to be part of something greater. If you can build a movement by creating a mission that people want to stand by and belong to, there it is. That's it. And so that's what I do for my clients. It's not just about the relationships that I have with the hosts, but I know how to take someone and position them in the right way so that a host looking at the bio says, "Oh my goodness, this is the kind of guest I need. This is what my listeners are going to relate to." And once you're on the show, if you know how to convert the listeners into followers, buyers, clients, that's the secret sauce. Because you can go on lots of podcasts, but if you don't know how to tell the right story and create the right message and the right mission, then you're just another podcast episode.
I agree with that. And I want you guys to notice something here. David told you that he's a great salesman. He just told you how: relationships and storytelling. He doesn't sell. I've been
Right.
on the other side of, finding out what he does. And the way he did it, I was actually asking questions. How much is this? All of these things, but not in a like, well, how much is this? What are you trying to sell me? I was like,
Yes.
I was intrigued, like, what is the price point on this? Like, this sounds
Mm.
incredible. And that's really the whole secret sauce behind you being a salesperson. Is, I think a lot of it is that storytelling and the way you go about it. So
Right.
one of the things that happened, and it's so difficult when I'm working with authors, it's taking them from the consumer side into being content creators. I hear a lot of excuses. I don't have time. How do you get that transition for people? What do you suggest to get them out of their own way, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and into something like this where they're actually creating content that they love creating?
Great question. So I struggled with this for so long, where I basically became addicted, essentially. I became addicted to consuming information. And every single new self-help book that came out, I was there. I was like, I'm buying a copy. And then I would get a copy of the book, and it's always like so exciting because it's hope. That's what we want. We want hope, right? Maybe this is going to change my life. Maybe this is going to help me to get to that next level. Like, this is going to get me out of my financial situation. This is going to get me to, inspire people and build a whole following. And this is gonna, and then what you do is that I would open up the book and I take out my yellow marker pen, which, by the way, all self-help junkies, all self-help addicts have this special marker pen. We're all part of the club. We're all part of this club, right? It's like, hold up your marker pen, everyone. It's like, yeah, I'm part of the club, right? Those of you that know what I'm talking about, you'll be nodding like, oh yeah, the marker pen. And what we do is what's the point of a marker pen? It's to highlight the main things in the book so that when you go back to the book, you can just look at the main. But the problem is if you highlight every line of the book, then what the hell is the point of marker pen? Like the whole point, right? But I would be that guy who literally every page is just filled with marker pen because, oh my God, this is a game changer. Wow, this is life changing. This is amazing. And then the problem is you get to the end of the book and there's this deep sense of, oh, man, it's over. Like, now what do I do? Now what do I do? And then what happens is I would go and just feed the addiction. So I would go and consume another book, or I would go onto YouTube and find myself binge watching how-to videos, or I would go and listen to podcasts like, how do I do this? 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 And then what you end up with is you end up with a brain that's just absolutely filled with information, but you're doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up with information overload. And the way I like to describe this, Juliet, is, people who suffer from obesity, food addiction, it's very clear, it's very easy to see the issue because the more you eat, the bigger you get. And so from the outside, you can see I've gained weight. I've gained 20 pounds. I've gained 50 pounds, whatever it is. And what happens to someone who's obese? You get heavy, you get slow, you feel tired, you feel lazy, you feel demotivated, you don't feel good about yourself. But what's interesting about what I call emotional obesity or mental obesity is that you are filling up your brain, you're overloading on information, and you're becoming obese. And what happens to your brain is it slows down and it becomes heavy, and you start getting lazy and you get overwhelmed and you just feel not good enough. And you're just like, oh God, what do I do? But nobody sees that. You just look like a normal person. But on the inside, you're struggling. So what's the solution? Well, just like an obese person physically, what do they need to do? Is they need to take the food that they're eating. The answer isn't don't eat. We have to eat. You're human. You'll die if you don't eat. So we've got to eat. But you need to convert the food into energy. You've got to work out, right? You've got to exercise. And it's also about eating the right food. That's another thing. But the same thing here. If you're only consuming information, but you're not converting it, and what does converting it look like? What does exercise look like in that respect? It's going out and doing something with that information. It's going out and writing that first chapter of that book. It's going out and starting the first thing that you need to do to start that business. It's going out and launching that first episode of the podcast, or getting on a podcast, getting yourself booked on that so that you could start sharing that information. That's what it's about. It's all about expression. If everything's stuck in here, then you're not expressing it outwardly and you're not putting it out into the world. And that's part of the issue, a big part of the issue.
That is so true. I work in that coaching space where we all bounce from event to event and book to book and podcast to podcast. But so many people, like 99% of the people, don't actually implement. They mean to, they mean well. And when they do, they get into that, this is the magic bullet mode. And there is no magic bullet to all this. It's a combination of good habits, good things, just like you were talking about there. That is an amazing analogy. That's fabulous. What was that one? We actually had a talk about an analogy before we got on.
With the because my camera was foggy and we thought it was the light.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, we got on Zoom and you couldn't see me because it looked like the lights were too bright, and I was shifting around, moving around, and we couldn't figure out what it was until eventually I was like, hold on a second, there's some dust on my camera. And as soon as I moved the dust away, the picture was clear. So it had nothing to do with the environment or the surrounding or other people or anything else. It just had to do with the camera lens. And so in a way, that's an analogy for our lives where, we blame everybody else, but maybe our own, glasses are just dusty and we need to clean them.
Yeah, we could
Um,
actually relate that back to what you just talked about too. It's
mm,
when we see other people out there being successful, it's not that they did anything but act on
yes.
that obese brain.
I always say, what's the difference between you and Tony Robbins when you're at a Tony Robbins event? The only difference is that he sold the ticket and you bought it.
Mm-hmm.
He was he's the creator and you're the consumer in that relationship. And once you become a creator, then the transaction changes, and now somebody else is the consumer and you're the creator.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get really practical, because I feel like a lot of times people hear things like this and they go, wow, okay, it sounds great, and wow, it's amazing. But how do you get super practical with it? Like, what can you do today, like, to actually start changing that? So I want to give you a sort of story that happened to me, an example. I was on a plane once watching a movie, and it was a movie about father and son. And I grew up with a very cold relationship with my dad. My father's father was a Holocaust survivor, and so he grew up basically without love, without hugs and kisses and things like that. And his mother drowned when he was about 13. So he didn't know how to express himself, in the way that he wanted to. And I'm watching this movie, and the father and son get into this big fallout, and the whole movie they're like, and then at the end there's this they reunite and they embrace. And I have tears rolling down my face, and I'm thinking to myself, I should really call my dad and tell him I love him. And that thought in that moment was so powerful and so real. I really wanted it. And we can all relate to this, where we get inspired in that moment, and we get what I call, we get in heat, where we emotionally are charged fully. And what happens though is, if we wait too long, then we start to cool off. And what happened to me was, I just kind of went on to the next thing, and then it was just a nice idea, but now it's just, nah, maybe not. Contrast that to about 6 months later, I was in a workshop about dealing with relationships, and one of the people there was sharing about their relationship with their father and how he had reunited with his father. And there I was again with tears in my eyes, thinking about, I should call my father. Now this time, I didn't wait. I got up and I left the workshop straight away. And I picked up the phone, and without thinking, because here's the problem, is sometimes we get too analytical and we overthink things. And when you overthink things, you end up talking yourself out. So what I did was, I didn't allow myself to overthink it. I just went into action. I just started doing it. And I dialed the phone, and he picks up, and I said, hi. And he's like, oh, hi, what's going on? And I said, I just want to let you know that I think you're amazing, and I wouldn't want any other father. And I know that you always try to give me things, but the only thing I want is for you to one day call me up just to tell me you love me. That's it.
Oh.
And his response was, I can't. And I said, I know it's hard for you, but I believe in you. And I hung up. 2 days later, I'm playing tennis, and it was a Friday afternoon. And I'm in the middle of my tennis game, and I see my phone is ringing, and I see it's my dad, and I freak out, because usually my dad only calls me in an emergency, like someone died or someone's in hospital, like something serious, because he never calls me. And I ran over, I quickly picked up the phone, I'm like, hello? And there's this like total silence on the other end. I'm like, hello? And then I hear, I love you.
Oh.
And I almost dropped the phone. I'm like, oh my goodness. That was such a breakthrough, And I think back to it because it's so easy to miss that moment, to miss those opportunities. And the only difference is you've got to take action immediately, because if you wait, you just cool off and you don't do it. You've got to do it while you're in that moment. So what I take away from that, and what I think people listening to this can take away from it, is get into a habit of, when you're listening to a podcast like this, right, or when you're reading a book, or when you're watching a YouTube video, and you suddenly get that inspiration to do something, like, I should do this, or I should do that. Do it. Stop the thing that you're consuming, put it on pause, and go and do it. Go and do one thing to like start the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything nowadays is on demand. You can pause anything. You can pause this podcast right now and go and do something. You can pause the book by closing and putting a bookmark there. You can pause a YouTube video. Just pause it and do something with it.
That was such a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh, I'm almost in tears, and I never cry. So, gosh, okay, last question. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, I have to pause Juliet's podcast right now and start my own. Thank you, Daniel. But here's the thing where they're going to overthink. How do I convert those? How do I get engaged listeners and convert those into buyers? Because that's really the piece where I think people avoid content now, is they haven't been able to grab ROI from it in the past. So
Right.
how do they do that?
Okay, so first of all, I noticed you said, let me pause and let me go start my own podcast. I get this question a lot. Daniel, should I start my own podcast, or should I go on other people's podcasts?
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's the difference. When you start your own podcast, it's going to take you a long time to build an audience.
Yes.
It's just there's 800,000 podcasts right now active, and every day there's another 500 new podcasts launching. There's a lot of podcasts out there, and there's a lot of people listening. There's over 100 million Americans listening to podcasts. So there's a huge market for it, but it's very hard to build your own audience. But getting on other people's audiences, as I mentioned earlier, is the quickest way to build an audience. So the short answer is both. You want to have your own podcast because that's yours, you own that. But you also want to be leveraging other people's audiences because that's instant access. However, if the question is, I only have time to do one, my answer to you is go on other people's podcasts, because that is going to be the quickest way to build your audience. And then you can always start a podcast, and you're going to start a podcast with a following already there.
Yes.
That's great. So to answer your question though, Juliet, about, how do you get an ROI? The problem is in this generation is everybody wants to make $1 million in 2 weeks. It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
And the people who it happens to just happen to be in a very, very, very unique situation at the right time with the right product. And but otherwise, for like 99% of people, you got to have patience. You got to build. You got to grow. And building an audience takes time. But here's the thing. The reward that you get after you've managed to build a solid audience is incredible, because now anything that you promote, anything that you come out with, you've got raving fans. Imagine if you've got 1,000 raving fans who will buy anything that you put out. You never need to chase clients again. You never need to sell. People just will want to buy from you. That's the power of positioning yourself as an authority. That's the goal. Clients who come to me say, Daniel, I want to get out there. I want to become an authority in my space. That's what I want. And so it takes time to do that. But once you've established yourself and positioned yourself in that way, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a different world.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to chase anymore. People come to you. And here's what's really exciting. You get to choose who you work with. When I first started my agency, I would take on anyone who came to me with some money. I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, give me your money. I don't know. And it was terrible. These people were nightmare. It was a nightmare to deal with these people. I hated it. I woke up on Monday morning. I was like, oh God, I've got to work with this guy. Oh no, he's going to call me again. He's going to drive me crazy. Oh my God. It's hell. until I was able to get to a point where people would call me up and be like, Daniel, I want to work with you. And I'd be like, hold on a second. I don't know if I want to work with you. I don't care how much money you've got. For me, quality of life is more important. I'll make less money and work with people I love working with and enjoy working with. And I know we're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna enjoy this, and I'm gonna get you great results, and you're gonna be happy, and I'm gonna feel fulfilled and accomplished. That's the kind of life that people really want. And so you can have that when you've established yourself as an authority, and when people are knocking on your door because they want to work with you.
That is so true. And if you've ever done what Daniel was just talking about, worked with someone who you knew you should have said no,
Yes.
oh my gosh, they will suck the
The
life
life.
out of you. They truly do.
Yeah,
So I don't
it's
know.
important.
There's a lot to be said there, but also you get to meet really great people when you're doing this, when you're interviewing. I mean,
Mhm,
I talk to people every day that I consider for my show, and I only ask the ones that I really, really liked, but I get to meet a lot of people.
mhm.
So, it enriches my life, because you were talking about that extrovert introvert thing. I'm really an introvert, but I love talking to people. I
Mm.
just I need to know when to shut it off.
Well,
Typically.
I mean, yeah, I tend to ramble as well.
Yeah.
We're all
So
guilty of it.
so where can we find you if we want to reach out and find out more about how you get people on these shows, what you do, the storytelling that you do
Mhm.
behind the bios? Where do we find you?
Okay, so my company website is gefenmediagroup.com. So that you could check out if you want to get booked on podcasts. If you want to hire my agency to get you booked on podcasts, you can apply booking a call with me through the website there. If you want to reach out to me, which I mean, everybody's on a different place in their life, right? Some people can afford to hire an agency, and some people are at a level where they want to just kind of do it themselves. I have actually, we're actually creating a course on how to do it yourself, and we're also creating a platform so that you can go on and actually get yourself booked on podcasts. It's going to be called
All
podbooker.com
right. Okay.
when it goes live. It's going live, I think, in about 4 or 5 weeks. Um, but I would love people to reach out to me, because the key is to engage and to start a conversation. I reply to every email that I get. It takes a while, but I get to it because I'm all about human connection, building relationships, and trying to help people at different levels, and trying to whatever I can do. Obviously, I'm very selective when it comes to the agency side of things. But if I can help somebody by giving them advice, I'm open to that. I'd love to give back. So go to email me at daniel@gefenmediagroup.com. By the way, Gefen is with one F, not two Fs.
I was just
So
going to say that.
yeah, daniel@gefenmediagroup.com. Send me an email, reach out, tell me where you're holding right now, where you want to get to. I'd love to help you.
Okay. And go check out I think this releases mid-November. So probably 2 to 3 weeks from when it releases, go check out podbooker.com. That sounds
Yeah,
super interesting. Thank you so much, Daniel. Did I just
thank
call you
you.
David?
You
No.
call me David. You call me David once. I didn't correct you because I just let it
Okay. So
fly. Yeah,
David, Daniel, no, go check out Daniel. And by the
yeah.
way, David actually spells his with 2 F's. So you can't really
I
get
know. I
up.
know. It's
I know he
yeah, it's
spells it the
terrible.
wrong way. How dare him?
Unbelievable. Also, my podcast, if they want to check that out, it's Can I Pick Your Brain? I don't think I mentioned it. So Can I Pick Your Brain if they want to check out the podcast.
Oh, very good. All right,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. You've been a wonderful
Thank you so
guest.
much, Juliet. Really, really appreciate it.